The next one I'd like to show you is how to sew on buttons by machine and do this buttonhole stitch. The Luminaire does a beautiful, beautiful buttonhole. It's very, very easy to use. So let's go ahead and do that. Now the buttonhole foot that comes with the Luminaire says A+. Do not remove that because you have a camera in your sewing machine and it's actually reading this foot. So if you take the A+ off, your machine will not be able to read it. You will notice with this buttonhole foot, it actually has a silver plate that will go over top the feed dogs. And so this is for varying thickness of material. So say you're doing buttonholes in a jacket or an outdoor coat. It's obviously going to be thicker than, say, a standard cotton. And this is the little drawer that our button goes in. Now we take that out. So you'll see this opens up. This opens up to put our button in. It's like a little drawer. So you'll sit your button in there and you'll close it so it's snug. Okay. So now I'm going to put the buttonhole foot on. So let's pop off our previous foot. Again, with all the brother feet, you have the little hook that we'll put underneath. There we go. Okay, now let's select our style of buttonhole. So let's go to our screen, and that's going to be our fourth category. And there are some amazing buttonholes in here. I'm always partial to a keyhole button. So you can have a keyhole with a square end or a pointed end or a thicker bar tack, and that's usually what happens at the end of your stitching. So I'm going to pick 4-13 because that's one of my favorite buttonholes. So our display changes to the A+ foot. It's going to show me what it looks like. So I have some fabric ready here. So whenever you make a buttonhole, you must have either interfacing in or stabilizer. Those stitches need to have that stabilization in it. Because we're going to end up, once we have the buttonhole stitch, we're going to cut that fabric. So it needs to have that strength in there. So if I lift my foot up, as you will notice that the top of the A foot will come up and the bottom should stay down. So when the Luminaire does it, it'll start at the what I would call the keyhole part, or the part closest to the enclosure, and then it goes down, back up, down, and back up. So you would mark where your buttonhole is going to be. Now I'm going to slide this between the top of the buttonhole foot and the bottom of the buttonhole foot. You'll see that there are the little red cross hatches. That's where I want my buttonhole to start. Go. So I can go ahead and start now. And it knows what size buttonhole to make because you've got the button in here. So it knows to make the appropriate size buttonhole. I'm going to speed that up just a tad. So it's doing what we call an underlay stitch, and then it'll come back up. Start doing it zigzag down. So the underlay stitches provide the foundation for your buttonhole stitch or your zigzag stitch. doing its bar tack now. So I would probably, just to be on the safe side, do a stitch in the place. Now cut my fabric, or cut my thread, sorry. Foot up. And you have made a perfect size buttonhole to fit this button. Now when you go to cut it, please put a pin at the end here so you just don't accidentally cut through all your stitches. Beautiful underneath. So with Brothers, there's usually a gray lever that comes down here. On the Luminaire, there is no lever. It knows what foot it is and what to do because it's reading this A+. If you remove this A+, please contact your Brother dealer to get a replacement. You can't just write A+, it needs to be the appropriate font and size. So let's sew this button on now. So I'm going to take off my buttonhole foot. Take out our button. So to sew a button on, and I highly recommend that you sew them on by machine. It's the M foot. Now, the nice thing about the M foot is that it has a little, what I would call tine or tongue that's in there. And what that does is that when it's stitching from hole to hole, it puts a little extra thread room in there. Because when you sew on a button, the button cannot be flat to the fabric. You need to have some space in there in order to get the other, say the other part of the jacket over, or your shirt, or whatever it is. It needs to have that room in the thread. When we used to sew buttons on by hand, you would actually put a matchstick across the top here and sew over top that, so it would give room for the button to move. So on the Brother button foot, it has this built-in tine, or I just call it a little tongue there. Okay, again, you always sew your button on. You must have stabilization or interfacing. Okay, so let's select the button stitch on our panel here. So I'm just going to scroll down, and 4-23 is the button stitch. Tells me I need my M foot, and I'm good to go. So this button has 4 sets of holes. Right? So we're going to do the 2 closest to me, and then I'll do the 2 away from myself. And I'll tell you why you want to do it in that order. So I just put my foot up a little higher. So I'm going to sew the 2 holes that are closest to me first. And you'll notice that the little red dots, you want to have them lined up with where the holes are. And here's my little tine that'll provide the extra space in the thread. So the first time you do this, always use your hand wheel to stitch. You just want to make sure that you're lined up. If you're not lined up, you're going to break a needle. So go ahead, hit the green, just let it go, and it'll sew the appropriate number of times, and it will secure the stitch. Let's cut our thread. Now I'm going to move to the second set of stitches. Now you'll notice that those threads just slid off that tine. Now I'm lined up again. And this is another reason why you do the 2 holes closest to you. Because if you did the 2 far away from yourself first, then your little tine gets caught up when you're coming forward as opposed to going back. Okay, so let's make sure, use my flywheel to make sure I am lined up. Yes, I'm good to go. Beautiful. Cut my threads. Remember to slide it out. And there. And you'll notice that there's extra thread in there so I can get my other side of the garment in there. Very important to have. If you ever had an issue trying to do something up, that's probably why the manufacturer didn't give you any room to put the other side of your garment on. There you go. So we've just sewn a beautiful buttonhole that will fit this button, and we've sewn the button on.